Now, Build One South Africa is calling for a moratorium on any VAT increase and an expanded list of zero-rated items. It says South Africans are in a dire situation and debt is increasing as net wealth declines. The party says government should also cut the numerous transport taxes. BOSA says this could help lower the cost of food and transport, basically the cost of living. To discuss this further, we are joined by the movement's Mmusi Maimane. He's the leader there. Dr. Maimane, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Of course, the moratorium on any increase on VAT, I'm sure that is reaction to what we heard about the austerity measures that we could see during the budget speech coming up in a few days' time. Already South Africans were, our pockets were tight after it was increased to 15% when Mmusi Maimane was finance minister.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans. I mean, what is clear is that this is a government that, instead of cutting its own fat, in other words, reducing ministries, in other words, making sure that government is lean and efficient, it cuts services to people, and then it adds unnecessary taxes to compensate for its own benefit. That's why, correctly, an increase in VAT will have inflationary costs that citizens simply cannot hold on. I just, in the community of Soweto today, went out with 350 Rand, which is the social relief distress grant. And when you look at the number of groceries that people were able to buy, it's clear that not only can you not provide electricity, you cannot provide food for yourself, it's minimal items. And as those items are going up and up, it shows that there is going to increase stress amongst the people of South Africa. That's why I'm saying this is a perfect opportunity in the midterm budget statement coming up next week, that government must look at a number of items that they can zero rate for VAT. Furthermore, it must adjust how we calculate fuel so that we can reduce the cost of fuel, because that adds to input costs in production. And lastly, I do think more than anything, government must consider making sure government is efficient. Let's cut the number of ministries. Let's cut the fat that sits in government so that we can ultimately ensure that we ease the burden among consumers. Otherwise, it is getting harder and harder for the people of this country.
And I know you wrote to the Minister of Finance just yesterday, I understand, in terms of all the things that you think he should consider. What I also found important, especially since you're discussing what is inflationary in our economy, load shedding, power that we don't have. We might have a few days of no load shedding at the moment, but we still know it's very much with us. But at the same time, we're seeing an over 30% increase.
Absolutely. And what that increase means is devastating for retail. It is devastating for any small businesses. It is devastating for households, because as that increase comes on board, the unit cost of electricity, you speak to many citizens, they now prefer to sit in the dark because they simply can't afford electricity. As I proposed that to Minister Pravin Gordhan and the court case that we won, we made the strong suggestion that schools, hospitals and clinics must be put on solar and alternative energy so that we can reduce demand, so that ultimately we can ensure that we stabilize the grid and don't have to pass on the cost of upkeep of Eskom to the consumer. Because the 30% increase will also come from municipalities and increase the cost of goods for many citizens. So we have to be deliberate as citizens of this country to say, who does the government favor more? Is it the politicians or the people? And I would urge that we've got to focus on that. There are other additional costs that are coming up that are laying up for consumers. The cost of water, the cost of other basic services. As these increase and there's no stable supply of those items, it makes actually living for communities harder and harder.
Well, you've been an MP before, and I'm pretty sure that you have been formed part of letters that would ordinarily be sent to a finance minister before he announces his budget speech, etc. Do they give an ear?
Well, we have to have a government that does that. Historically, we've always had the ANC as a majoritarian government. So often, even after you petition them in various respective committees, they hear some of their input. But sometimes what eventually happens is that they railroad it into the parliamentary process. Let's keep in mind that as soon as this midterm budget policy statement is tabled, the actual budget will then be tabled in February next year. That's the final budget. But in the meantime, as budget votes are coming up in the last half, as a member of parliament looking at item by item, we need to vote against these things. And this is an opportunity for many citizens to actually stand up. We cannot continue with high inflation. It's not driven by demand, it's driven by input costs. And I really believe a government that falls deaf to the ears of the people must raise their voices and raise their votes next year so that we can ensure that ultimately politicians don't fall deaf to the pleas of the people.
Well, hopefully he does, take a listen, especially after we heard that there was that big meeting between the president, the Reserve Bank governor, as well as the finance minister, etc., in Stellenbosch at the last minute about that consideration of that increase with VAT that would definitely kill a lot of households and just make the middle class, suffer even more.
Absolutely, because particularly as inflation rises, we also know people are only not getting hit only by the increase of VAT. It also means as inflation creeps up, the Reserve Bank is mandated in its policy to keep inflation within a narrow band. And so what effectively happens, you increase the repo rate so that you can curb inflation. And what means is that for people who have cars, a house, or anything, that cost of those things go up. Remember, in South Africa, we don't have jobs in too many households. It's why as BOSA, I keep fighting for a job in every home so that actually every family has some income coming into it. But if you are dependent on welfare or dependent on remittances that come often from middle-class families who have to look after siblings in what is typically and often called black tax, that money isn't going further anymore. That money isn't covering some basics. So let us be deliberate as a country to say, let's use this opportunity to focus on citizens rather than ultimately what I think the Minister of Finance will focus on, which is the ANC's priorities rather than the people's priorities.
Mmusi Maimane, the president of BOSA, thank you so much for your time here on eNCA. Well, the medium-term budget policy statement by Finance Minister eNCA is expected in a few days' time, and it sets the tone for us in South Africa before the, sauna by the president next year with the plans that he wants, and then eventually in February being told exactly how much we'll spend on different things. It's quite important, so we need to keep an eye on that.